Hello, you're watching Following On India. Myself, Jon Norman, and Jarrod Kimber, dissecting all the big stories coming out of Indian cricket. We're joined by big guests every week, and we will be bringing you live commentary as well. So stay tuned to the talkSPORT Cricket YouTube channel, subscribe and follow. You are watching Following On India. Okay, Jarrod, so the first test went the way that we kind of expected it would, India winning, but we were all getting quite excited when India were 144 for 6, and then up stepped Ravindra Jadeja and Ravichandran Ashwin, and that was the game. It's done. We don't need to talk about it too much, but essentially, don't worry, we will talk about it. You wrote a piece after day one. It was really interesting. Reminded me of Surrey in about 2004 when they'd lose their first 5 wickets to nothing. And then Martin Bicknell, Ian Salisbury, Alex Tudor, one of the Hollyoaks.
Duckland Mustang?
Maybe. But it was more Martin Bicknell than the others. They basically scored more runs than the top 5. So it's good to see that India are basing their whole tactics.
It's kind of the history of New Zealand cricket, isn't it? Before like Ross Taylor and Kane Williamson, it's almost like the entire history of New Zealand cricket that their batting started at like Chris Cairns and Vittori and Perore and all those guys.
And Mohammed Siraj is a kind of Chris Martin-esque number 11 as well. So yeah, I'll go with that. But here we are. It's and it was phenomenal. I tell you what, we'll talk about that, but I also want to talk about something else as well, because being in England and you coming from Australia, do you feel like you've kind of missed out a bit on Ravichandran Ashwin? Because we watch a lot of Indian cricket, so we enjoy watching him play, but he never really plays that much outside of India.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like I kind of missed out a bit.
Do you know what? I was at, I don't know if his first overseas test, but it was really early on in his career when he was playing in Australia, and he played a couple of tests and he didn't get a lot of wickets. Now, you can imagine most finger spinners bowling for Australia in Australia for the first time don't get any wickets, right? But I thought he bowled brilliantly right across that. And I remember by the time they got to the 4th test in Adelaide, the Australians were like, this guy's legit. Like, this is not just a spinner bowling. This is a guy we have to worry about. And I think they played him in South Africa, either just before or just after that, but around that same period. And then they just kind of went, nah, he's just going to play at home. And I think, I think we talked about it recently, and it kind of stunted his development a little bit. He really should be. Like, if you wanted to make an argument that Anil Kumble is a better bowler than him, I think it's a fair argument to make, because Anil Kumble was a more rounded bowler than him, right? Anil Kumble had to bowl on flatter wickets in India, and he had to bowl all around the world all the time, generally as the main spinner, right?
On his own.
Yeah. And I think Anil Kumble bowled something like 60 or 65 overs a game. Like those guys worked him to death, right? There were no 5 bowling lineups in those days, right? And so you look at that and you go, what could Ashwin have been if he'd been able to develop? Because if you watch him in Australia, every time he goes back to Australia, I just think he's better. And so I wonder how good a bowler he could be. And you look at Lyon as the opposite. No one thinks Lyon is as talented as Ashwin, but Lyon is a really good bowler in pretty much every conditions he goes to, right? Like Asia was probably the one that took him the longest to work out, but everywhere you look with Nathan Lyon, he's a really, really good bowler. And with Ashwin, it's just taken his time. And when he gets in the side, of course, he's like, oh, he's the 5th bowler and we didn't need him all that much. Almost ignoring the fact that you never need the 5th bowler all that much. But essentially, it's all about Jadeja. And when you think about really what they have, it's a unique situation where they have probably, let's say, 2 of the top 10 spinners of all time, right? Like, I don't think there's any doubt there. I mean, certainly Ashwin is higher than that, but Jadeja's probably in the argument for that list as well. One of them can bat at number 6 and number 5 when you have to, right? But number 6 probably. The other one can bat at number 7 when you have to, but is a really, really top quality number 8. And they're kind of cannibalized. Like, Ashwin cannibalizes all the attention on Jadeja's bowling because Jadeja is seen as one-dimensional. It's like, it's a pretty good dimension. Like, I'd stick with that dimension if it was me.
I'd live in that dimension.
Yeah, I'd be pretty happy with that dimension. And then Ashwin loses out on games because he's got this great all-rounder in the side. And so they're kind of, it'd be interesting to see if they end up a little bit like Kirtley and Courtney and a little bit like Wacker and Wasim, where it's like, at a certain point, it's very hard. They're both great in separate ways, but they kind of cannibalize the attention and they're just a partnership in a way that others aren't. But because of, if Ashwin lives in any other era, and even with Kumble, I think he would have just him and Kumble probably would have swapped the role. Like, sometimes you'd have the off spinner overseas and sometimes you'd have the wrist spinner overseas. Whereas with Jadeja, it's like you just have to pick Jadeja's batting when he's available, right?
One of the so we did a stock take last week, didn't we? Stock report, but and everyone's 7s and 8s and 9s and 10s and all this kind of stuff. But we had a chat with Deep Dasgupta as well. One of the really big, interesting parts of this India side is the role of Mohammed Siraj. And one of the points you were making is, okay, we know that he can succeed as a number 3 or number 4 fast bowler, but can he succeed as a number 2? And actually, he may be number 1 as well, because of course Bumrah's not going to play every match.
Yeah.
Stock after that match, we're going to take it one match at a time with him. But he was, of course, sharing the duties with Bumrah. He's a number 2 bowler now. How do you feel his stock went, up or down, or stays where it is?
I thought there were moments when it was okay. I don't know. I mean, how did you sort of view it? I didn't think the game was about him really in the end. Maybe that was
no, and it wasn't about him. It wasn't, and it was just one match, right?
But yeah, I think so. There was one spell where I thought he looked really good. I'm trying to think. I think it was in the first innings when they were flying.
Yeah.
And I thought he looked really good, and then he looked a little bit flat afterwards. I think, though, if you look at the scoring rates, I'm just trying to bring them up now. So Bangladesh in the second innings, they ended up scoring at under 4 runs and over. But my memory is that they were above 4 runs and over, like for a big part of that time. And generally, those are the days where Siraj goes at 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Right. And he didn't. And that ability to be a stock bowler. And that's what me and Deep were really talking about. If he can just be a stock bowler on the bad days.
That's all he needed to be in that attack. Yeah.
And look, if Bumrah's not in the side, it's a little bit different because then he has to step up a little bit. But when Bumrah or Shami is in the side, all he really needs to do is be like, oh, great, this is the day when I take 8 wickets and no one can hit me. And then for the next 3 test matches, I'll just be the stock bowler and, bowl some hard spells. If he can do that role, he's a phenomenal player. It wasn't really asked to do that much in this particular game, and partly because Akash Deep played really well, right? Like, I think that's a big part of it as well. Like, he had some very good moments. And so it meant that there have been some times when Siraj has been the second seamer in the lineup, but he's been the second seamer, but there's been a third seamer, but that bowler hasn't, played particularly well. And so Siraj has had to do a lot of extra emotional work, I suppose. Do you know what I mean? Rather, leadership work.
Yeah,
whereas
totally.
Knowing that Akash was bowling well, it's probably a lot easier in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you find Akash Deep went? Because he was a player that we didn't really talk about last week.
No, I mean, we didn't really know who which direction they were going to be going.
Yeah, we kind of thought they might go another spinner rather than another seamer. They probably will go 3 spinners for the second test. But
it's interesting because they got the majority of their wickets through spin, didn't they? But it was actually a really good wicket for seam bowling. Yeah. There was some good carry. Look, Akash Deep in the first innings, I think he bowls like 3 or 4 overs and takes a couple of wickets. Like, you would take that over again. And this is what I was talking about before with the fifth bowler. I think he bowls like 10 or 12 overs in the game. Like, he's not like he's bowling all that much in that game. But if he comes in and does something, it was interesting that he was first changed because I see him more as a new ball bowler. But if he can come in and take a couple of wickets here and there on wickets like that, I think that helps Bumrah and Siraj quite a lot. And the interesting thing is, I don't know if we were looking at this the other day, but Jasprit Bumrah's stats with the new ball in India are not particularly great. In fact, he's not a particularly great new ball, red ball bowler, right? There is an argument to be said that you just wait for the shine to come off the ball and you give it to him around the 12 over mark. And Akash looks like a very good option. And he's not the only one, of course. They've got Arshdeep and might have some other options as well at the top. But if you can get Siraj at one end and maybe one of these swing type bowlers bowling early on, if anything goes wrong, like if you have a bad 3 overs, you just throw it to Bumrah anyway, right? Like, it's a bit like you almost use the younger guys the way that Australia uses Mitchell Starc. It's like, we'll keep Mitchell Starc on when he looks awesome. If he doesn't look awesome, he might bowl 2 overs.
Let's talk about Rishabh Pant. How can you not? Before we do that, let's hear.
He had a decent game, didn't he?
He did. He went all right. Ian Smith, the former New Zealand wicketkeeper batter, was talking with Neil Manthorpe and Steve Harmison on Following On. Go and check that out. Let's hear what he had to say, or see what he had to say.
I like Pant as a cricketer. It's an extremely important role, and he's got massive shoes to fill because they've had a little revolving door since Stoney, haven't they? To be perfectly honest, I mean, you talk about hero factor. It's pretty hard to go past MS. But once you reach a certain stage in Indian cricket and you start to perhaps before an international level, your life changes dramatically. We know that. I mean, you just become a superstar beyond anything most sporting people would be akin to. You know, people talk about the great baseballers and footballers of the world, but very few of them would know the pressure and the accolades that come with being a successful Indian cricketer. So you get into that market, and you're talking fairly serious stuff. Rishabh Pant, I like him because he's just got that. He's got that attitude about him. He has got a bit of a Baz attitude about him. You're right. He's not going to back down. Put it that way. He's not going to run away from a fight. And he'll if you ask him to open, he'll open. If you ask him to bat at 5, he'll bat at 5. And you know, he's probably not the best glove man the world's ever seen, but he's working on it. He's getting better at it. And over there, of course, it's very important that you are efficient because they spend so much of your day standing up to the stump. So he's a given to me. He's Gilchrist-like in that regard. He is Gilchrist-like in that regard for me. Yeah, I rate him very, very highly.
So yeah, Rishabh Pant back in the Indian Test side. It's been a couple of years, and it couldn't have gone much better. 102nd innings, and there's been a lot of comparisons. I mean, he's played 34 Test matches, and there are comparisons with Adam Gilchrist. I read a few of the articles in the Indian press comparing where both players were at the 34 Test stage, within 200 runs of each other. Very similar dismissals behind the stumps. Gilchrist
I'm assuming Gilchrist had a higher average because Gilchrist's average was loaded at the start of his career, and if you look at the end, he kind of struggled a little bit.
Yeah,
I mean, struggled compared to the beginning of his career.
Yeah, his average was higher and his strike rate was higher. But look, we're talking very similar. The main difference is, of course, Rishabh Pant is coming in at number 5,
yes,
and Adam Gilchrist is coming in at number 7, and you wrote a fascinating piece on your site about the fact that it's seemingly easier to bat a little bit at the start of an innings rather than in the middle. It's kind of flipped on its head with what the Adam Gilchrist days, I suppose. So, you know, Rishabh Pant is coming to the crease more often than not with his team under real pressure, whereas Adam Gilchrist used to walk into the crease with the opposition bowlers absolutely flogged and knackered. Not to take anything away from Gilchrist, but
no. It's true.
That's just how it is. You'd rather be facing, you know, bowlers who bowled 80, 90 overs than bowlers that bowled 30 overs, right? So,
yeah, so I think it's the last 5 or last 10 years in India, but certainly the last 5 years where the worst time to bat is between the 20 over and the 40 over period, which is such a bizarre period of time to think that's when it's difficult. But it's essentially, I think what's happening is the lacquer goes off the ball. So the ball starts to spin a little bit more, but the ball stays hard. The minute it gets soft, we've seen Jadeja and Ashwin and Akshar Patel and tail enders, right, making all these runs. So we know how much easier it gets. But when that ball's hard, good luck. That's when Rishabh Pant has been coming in. And so you're right, you know, the pressure. So we had a look at the medians of players, you know, and when they come in to bat and everything, because it's a really interesting one, especially for the guys who come in lower down the order. And essentially, no one has ever had a better entry point in international cricket than Adam Gilchrist. He used to come in with the median score was about 250, which is a most teams don't score 250. Like, do you know what I mean?
No.
Like, it's a remarkable number to come in.
How many overs would that be as well? Would he'd be coming in
50,
possibly
55?
65?
Yeah, maybe.
No,
Yeah, actually, you're right.
So 15 overs of the ball to go as well to kind of get himself in, and then of course the opposition captain will be holding his fast bowlers back for the second new ball, so he won't be coming up against, you know, the Wazir. Well, maybe actually against Pakistan would be a little bit different, but still, you know, it's.
Do you remember? Goffey always says that Gilchrist was the hardest one to bowl to, and he doesn't say he was the most skillful. He said that by the time you bowled to Gilchrist, you were exhausted. Yeah, and then you had a guy who would come in with runs on the board and would just hit 4s for fun. So it's a very different job. When Rishabh Pant comes in, because as you said before, he's batting at number 5. You know, he's coming in with, you know, and then I'm not saying they're always in trouble or anything, but, you know, the score is roughly around 118. And it's also been for 4 because he's batted at number 6, of course, and number 7. He's kind of gone everywhere in the order. But he is going to be probably a number 5, or at least in the short term. And it's a completely different job, right? And he's got a lot more responsibility. And what's interesting is that he's still scoring at a rate. I think one of the things for India is, I think in T20 cricket, he got to a point where maybe Ricky Ponting whispered in his ear that being an anchor was better for the team than scoring really quick. And so he went through a period of slowing down his scoring and making sure he got more runs. I actually think Rishabh Pant, you want him to average 40 to 43 with a strike rate of 90, right? Because that's chaos. You know what I mean? And if Rohit or Virat or, you know, Jaiswal or any of the players up the order have done something, Gill, KL, whoever's ahead of him has done something, and he comes in and he hits 70 off 55 balls, it's like it's especially on low scoring Indian wickets as they currently are. I mean, what do you do? It's just good luck, right? So I think you want to encourage that. So, you know, if you look at the great attacking players in history, I've heard people say he could even replace Virat at number 4. They don't have many attacking number 4s, right? You know, you get maybe Lara and KP batted there a little bit, but you don't get many players who attack at number 4. I think number 5 and number 6 is exactly where they want him to be, especially now that they have a left-hander opening the batting in Jaiswal as well. And I think that's almost a perfect situation for him. But that would be the thing that I would be encouraging him all the time is, like, just keep scoring quickly. We don't need you to average 55, because if you can average 43 and we have the other guys making runs at the top of the order, you're just going to cause so many extra problems for everyone else. And it was just a bit the same when Gilchrist did start to struggle at the end of his career. No one in Australia went up to him and said, "I just get your average back over 50." Everyone just went, "Just keep whacking him, mate," because everyone's still terrified of you. And you know, we're already seeing it's interesting that Gilchrist has been mentioned. When you actually, I think, asked me for the numbers to have a look at the median, your old friend Alex Stewart has one of the worst records of any when he came into bat. So when he came in, England were always, I think they were about 3 for 80, and I think
that's about right.
Yeah, and I think Andy Flower, Zimbabwe were about 3 for 65 or something. Also, when Andy Flower came in and they were like 3 for 65, it was probably off about 60 overs because of the way that the Zimbabwean top order used to score. So at least he had the older ball by the time he got in. But, you know, the job that Pant's going to be is probably going to be around that 100 for 3 mark in his career, right? And when he comes in at 100 for 3, there's a very chance that you are 200 for 4 by the, you know, in less than a session, right? Look, I actually, to go back to this test match, as you said before, it was a bit predictable and everything. But if you go back, they took those 3 early wickets, Bangladesh, right? Really fascinating wickets, you know, really good by Hassan Mahmood. And then that next period afterwards, Rishabh Pant is the one who's smacking the ball everywhere and putting pressure back on Bangladesh. And eventually, Jaiswal and KL Rahul extend that even further. So when Jadeja and Ashwin come into bat, it's after that 40 over mark or around that 40 over mark, and the ball's already a bit soft. You go to Bangladesh, they didn't have anyone do that. And so they didn't, by the time they got to the 40 over mark, they were basically all out, right? They had I think they had Mahidi Hassan and tail enders left. And so the Rishabh Pant being able to do that is so important, I think. And even so, the second innings runs is what everyone remember. I actually think from the point of this game, the first innings runs, I think he made 40 on, didn't he? It wasn't like a huge score, but it took India from a position where it looked like they could be 4 or 5 down, and it put all the pressure back on Bangladesh at that point.
Yeah, 39 at a strike rate of 75.
That's
1 out.
40-ish, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, it is. Look, we're going to be talking about a lot more about Rishabh Pant, and just a chance now, actually, just to show you a video that's going to be coming out on the YouTube channel on Thursday. Jarrod, myself, and the former Indian opener, Kimber Dasgupta, talking about the Border Gavaskar coming up this year. If you were to stop,
it matters more to
100 Australians in the street and say, what would you rather do? Would you go and rather win the Ashes in England, or would you rather win the Border Gavaskar in India? What do you think?
But just let me also put a different twist to it. It's also, with Ashes comes a lot of history.
Yep, which has to be factored in.
You know, right?
Taken away.
So Border Gavaskar, it's a comparatively newish phenomenon. It's only been there for what, 7-8 years, maybe 3 whatever 7-8 series old. So I think this rivalry, let's just call this a rivalry.
Yeah.
Ashes as a rivalry is a lot older, a lot historical. They're, not a lot more nostalgic as compared to this particular rivalry, which is comparatively new. I mean, we're talking about a decade, maybe till 2015. It wasn't really that big a rivalry, like India going to Australia, like, okay.
They were going to lose, right? So it didn't matter,
But, when everybody talks about 2005 Ashes, and in the same breath you talk about, VVS and Rahul Dravid, right? I mean, that series in India, and the fact that Australia only won one tour in India, even during the golden years. So it's always had massive prestige. So, all right, let's take out cricket. Cricket didn't exist before 2000. Okay, so you can get rid of all the history. Since 2000, Ashes against Border Gavaskar. It seems like we've swapped arguments here. By the way. Somehow. I don't know what kind of Jedi mind trick you just played there. But the Border Gavaskar is definitely bigger than the Ashes.
So you will be able to see that full video on Thursday. That's going to drop at about midday in India, about 7 a.m. in the UK. Jarrod, what about Bangladesh then? We haven't really discussed how they went. We were expecting a challenge, and we got one but it was just that inexperience again, wasn't it? You see it so often. You see it in England as well, not to the same extent. But what I find, there are teams who are so well versed in Test cricket that they know, even when they're behind, they can get back into the game. And what you find with teams that don't play as much Test cricket is that they're all well and good when they're ahead of the game, but they don't know how to react when they're behind it. And that kind of seemed to be the case with Bangladesh.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting. My view on it was that we knew they went in with three strengths, right? They had a 5-man attack, which is, and it was going to be 2 or 3 spinners and 2 seamers, all of which, was going to suit those conditions. We knew that they had like a really good middle order from number 4 through to number 8, which is, a strength of theirs. And we know that they have 2 all-rounding spinners who are very, very good quality spinners. The seamers stood up both innings, even in the second innings. The seamers completely stood up, right? Did what they needed to do. The middle order did not, and the spinners did not. So you ended up with, they had 3 strengths going in. And, I've just done a big piece on what kind of a team you would need to beat India at the moment with. Like, there's no current team that can go to India and beat India, right? No one is set up to be able to play there. But you go through history, there aren't that many sides throughout the history of the game who are set up to travel to India right now and be competitive, let alone to beat them. And Bangladesh is not on that level of talent, but because they have seam bowling options and, good seam bowling options now, because they have a longer batting lineup to number 8, because they can play spin quite well, and because they can bowl spin quite well, they are the team that should have been much better at that. But when you look at it, they didn't play spin very well. And they didn't bowl spin very well. Now, I know there's something about Shakib having a finger injury. I don't know. He still seems to be spinning it a long way. So I don't know how much it bothered him, but he went at more than a run a ball in this game. Shakib Al Hassan cannot go at more than a run a ball in India, right? Like he just had to work out a way to bowl more defensively and to hold up an end and allow Mahidi Hassan, who I thought throughout the test was bowling better at times. I thought he was working it out. But were you watching the New Zealand Sri Lanka test as well?
Yeah.
So we got to see 3 Asian sides playing all at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So you watch India bowl, and then you watch Bangladesh bowl, and then you watch Sri Lanka bowl. And it's like India spinners are bowling at like 85 to 95 miles an hour. Bangladesh bowlers are bowling at like 80 to 90. And the Sri Lankan spinners are like 78 to 85, right? It's so noticeable how different. It's not just the talent that those bowlers have. Ashwin and Jadeja, obviously they're incredibly talented. They're just that little bit quicker. And I thought it just took a little bit too long for Bangladesh to work out let's call it the Tom Hartley rule, right? Of just like, sometimes you just got to bowl quick on those wickets and just do it that way. And I don't think they quite got that for early on. But if you've got 3 strengths, right? And maybe 4 strengths if you count them, certainly the way they play spin as well. And only one of them comes off, you're not going to beat India, are you? Like, Bangladesh need at least 3 out of the 4 of those things to work, probably all 4 to steal a test match. And they put themselves in a position to win that game on day 1, and then they lost by 280 runs. That tells you how good India are, but also how much Bangladesh really dropped the ball in that game.
Okay, let's look ahead to that second test match. We're expecting a different surface. Pleased to say that we're going to have a guest coming up on the show. It's Avanish Hegde from cricket.com. Well, I'm pleased to say that we're joined by Avanish Hegde from cricket.com, anchor, broadcaster, host, to look ahead to the second test match. We've spoken a lot about the first, but what of the second? Because we're expecting a different type of surface. So possibly India going to go with 3 spinners. We shall see. But Avanish, what do you expect from this test? And do you see this as, India moving away from Bangladesh in the way that they did on days 3 to 4? Or do you think it might be another quite competitive test match?
Historically, I think it should be competitive. The last 2 affairs in Kanpur have gone all 5 days. The last time we played there was 2021. I think Shreyas Iyer scored 100. There was no Virat, there was no Rohit, there was no Bumrah, there was no Pant. So obviously that test match suggested that they went for 3 spinners, Ashwin, Jadeja and Akshar. And I think the color of the surface also will change from the red soil that we saw in Chepauk to the black soil that we're going to see in Kanpur. So let's see how that really pans up, because I spoke about the 2021 test, but the 2016 test against New Zealand as well was a pretty good one. I think India won that one, but the 21 test was a drawn affair, thanks pretty much to New Zealand playing out of their skin, John.
What do you think about, we heard some talk about Ashwin playing his last test at Chepauk, perhaps, and he kind of made reference to it as well. It feels like to me, he's got in mind of, I really want to play in Australia. I really want to play in England, World Test Championship or beyond, let's see how he goes. But it feels like at the moment, Ashwin might be thinking about retirement, but also playing as many games as he can before he makes that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with Ashwin loving Test cricket so much, I think he's always going to put that in terms of the forefront of his career. And even though he's in the twilight of his career, I think he's just a scientist. And I know that's a word overused for Ashwin, but make no mistake, the man loves the game so much. India can space it out. I don't think India will not rest Ashwin. I think he's key to our success. And whether it was his last game in Chepauk, only time will tell. I think because he's such a great, they could really, knowing the BCCI, make a special Chennai test in the years down in 2 years' time or something like that. So you can't really rule it out. I was actually speaking to some of the fans outside Chepauk, and I asked them this very question, Jarrod, and they were adamant that he's going to be playing 1 more test minimum, and this is surely not his last. But if it was, what a way to bow out, 100 and a fifer.
Do you think he was making a statement especially with his batting? I know I'm not saying he only made runs because of Australia, but do you think there'd been a little bit of talk about Kuldeep being the second spinner in Australia and everything, and he was like, I need to remind you all, I could still bat?
Absolutely. I think it's a very underrated skill that when we talk about Ashwin, the Test cricketer, not many people look at his batting. And I know he's got 4 against the West Indies, 1 against England, the latest one being against Bangladesh. But I genuinely feel he grew up as a batter. I think there is a certain ego element in terms of Ashwin himself thinking of him as a batter. So the credentials of the bat, I didn't think this 100 had to kind of prove that, but it just gives the selectors and the team something to think about, because the last time as well, he had to play because he was forced in. But how many times have we seen it in a away test that Ashwin has dropped on his batting game more than the pitch being a rank turner or not? So I hope he does play all the 5 games in the VGT, because again, his mind games is what I love as an Indian cricket fan.
What about Rishabh Pant? Do you think that there's ever any chance that he could even surpass MS Dhoni in India's affection for a wicketkeeper batter like those two?
You wouldn't believe it, John, because I was actually, again, talking to some of the fans outside Chennai, and they absolutely love MS Dhoni, right? Because he's a demigod there, if not anything else. And with Rishabh Pant doing what he's doing in the longest format of the game, all the Dhoni fans, even the ardent ones, were happy to say that, you know what, Pant is just supremely better than Dhoni in tests. And I think it's fair to say that, because what he's given us in this short career, and MS Dhoni, white ball legend, but in the test scheme of things, every true Indian cricket fan understands that Dhoni did have his pros and cons as a test match cricketer, be it as a captain or as a batter. So hands down, hand in my heart as well, I think Rishabh Pant is supremely better and is potentially the best ever test keeper that we produced, barring Farooq Engineer and the great Dinesh Karthik and so on and so forth.
Yeah, but I mean, he's already kind of made a play for all those guys, hasn't he? Like in terms of average. And Dhoni's a legend in so many ways, but test batting is probably the one thing where everyone went, he kind of should have done better, and it never quite worked. How much though is it now in India that you need to be all format? Like, I know Ashwin's not particularly in all format great in the same way, but it does feel now like there's a real push towards you know, Bumrah and Rohit and Virat being all format. Does Rishabh Pant have to step up in T20 cricket and ODI cricket as well to sort of, because the Dhoni level is quite high, right?
It is a huge sort of shoes to fill. And I feel with Pant, he's got ample amount of chances in the T20 setup. Coming back, of course, after that horrendous accident and then winning the World Cup served him well. But if you looked at his numbers, many fans were arguing, why didn't Samson stand a chance? Then the left-handed sort of tax comes into with Rishabh Pant, even though there's someone like Ishan Kishan in the mix. I generally feel Rishabh Pant is a 3-format player, but fans have kind of had enough of him in the white ball scheme of things. Sure, there's always a second chance in life, and Pant can probably come back in the next 18 months and fight for his position for the 2026 World Cup or the 2027 World Cup. But I genuinely see this format being the best for Pant. And the proof's in the pudding, Jarrod and John. I mean, he's done it in South Africa, he's done it in Australia, he's done it in England. So what more can you expect from a Delhi boy, should I say?
Just before you go, Avanish, there's a story this week in England where essentially the Lancashire chief exec has come out and said that the ECB need to follow the BCCI's lead. You were talking about Shreyas Iyer earlier on. Go back to the start of the year, and there was some criticism about the fact, I think it was Shreyas Iyer and maybe Ishan Kishan, they didn't play domestic red ball cricket, and was it Gautam Gambhir? But essentially the BCCI came out and said, look, everybody's got to play red ball cricket domestically, cannot avoid playing, red ball cricket if you want to play test cricket for India. Do you think that's something that has worked? I mean, Shreyas Iyer, as you said, he scored runs the last time India played at Kanpur. I mean, as a mentality and approach, do you think that is one that actually the ECB should follow and essentially enforce that in this country as well?
Yeah, it's a tough one to answer, but what I would say is when Jay Shah kind of made that clear in his stance, sending players like Ishan Kishan and Shreyas Iyer back into the domestic scheme of things, he was kind of setting a precedent going forward, saying that it shouldn't just be all about the IPL hullabaloo. It should be generally kind of giving more importance to the domestic circuit, in this case, the Ranji. And it's done wonders for some of the players to even participate in the latest Dulip Trophy, right? So we saw your trademark white ball bowlers such as Yash Dayal and Arshdeep Singh, who are normally affiliated with the IPL and household names through that. They've, of course, kind of made their mark and pushing for a place in the test squad, because India obviously have a plethora of pacers, John. And when you kind of add in the versatility of a Yash Dayal or Arshdeep Singh, it does give you that sort of cushion. But coming back to the Shreyas Iyer bit, I feel there's various chances for cricketers these days to go and ply their trade in the county. We've seen that Ajinkya Rahane. I think he's doing that beautifully at Leicester. We've seen that with other Indian cricketers in the past. I think Shreyas probably needs to just go there and spend some time out there, because even in the current Dulip Trophy, it's not gone well for him. So the question is, when can he come back in the scheme of things? And we're talking about the IPL captain here, right? So that just goes to show the depth that this beautiful country has. And it's a conveyor belt, because we were talking to a Bangladesh journalist in terms of their domestic cricket structure, and it's about 8 teams to choose from, whereas India have about 25, 30, and there itself you have about 120 middle order batters to choose from. So it's crazy. But players like Shreyas Iyer, if I was him, dare I say, I would probably go to the county. I know it's easier said than done, but just to bide your time as a cricketer, because he still has miles in his legs and age on his side. So there's definitely going to be a second coming, is my humble opinion.
I think the interesting thing going forward is that players like Shreyas Iyer, and we saw this with Nicholas Pooran and so many other players, they don't play a lot of cricket. And so Babar Azam, I think a lot of Babar Azam's recent problems outside of the small technical things are literally just that he hasn't played enough balls to get himself back into form. And the West Indians were the first ones who told me that. They were just like, the problem with T20 is you go through a tournament or two where you don't make any runs, just naturally, right? Like you just don't make any runs in that tournament, and then suddenly you don't do anything. So even if you want to be a really good IPL player in India, you're probably better off playing, some Ranger games, some List A games and everything else, going over, as you said, playing some county cricket or whatever that may be. And I think that players will start to think about that a little bit more, just because T20 cricket can be, I played 2 tournaments here and I faced 84 balls. And now I've got 6 months off, right? Like, what do I do for the next 6 months? So I do think, there is an element of just facing as many balls as you can seems to be quite important going ahead. So I don't mind that at all.
yeah, I think it's a volume of cricket when we talk about it, and we kind of sympathize with cricketers nowadays in terms of how much cricket they're playing. But then when you break it down, absolutely spot on, Jarrod. The fact that you can look at it in the cold light of day as a batter and be like, hold on, I didn't actually play that much, because cricket's a funny game. You might enter a competition which has 14 games, but if you get a couple of first bowlers and low scores, then you need to really think of, okay, fine, apart from the nets, I really need to be match ready and match practice and oil those shoulders. So onwards and upwards, I guess, for every cricketer out there.
Well, that pretty much brings us towards the back end of the show. You may mention that Sri Lanka versus New Zealand test match. New Zealand are going to be the visitors. They're going to be in India very shortly. They've just lost by 65 runs, I think, against Sri Lanka. Your thoughts on the kind of challenge that New Zealand are going to bring to India, both from a bowling and a batting perspective?
I kind of watched this. I know Bangladesh didn't have a good test match, but I was thinking it's Bangladesh. You should have the 3 tests in India at the moment, and India the 2. And I know that's not how cricket works and everything else. But based on, if I'm betting on a team winning 1 out of 3 test matches, I know I'm betting on Bangladesh over New Zealand at the moment. Having said that, I thought New Zealand played pretty well. Sri Lanka have been a really good side of recent times. You know, they had a tough schedule in the last World Test Championship, and they were like at one stage punching for the semi-finals. They're kind of punching for the semi-finals again. They've got, I think after New Zealand, they've got to go to South Africa for 2 tests, and then they've got Australia at home. So there's a lot that they need to get right in order to get there. But I thought they were a good side, and yet New Zealand. Was it the end of day 2 when New Zealand? I think they lost a couple of wickets at the end. They should have ended up with a 150-run lead in that game. They really. I'd be interesting to hear. I didn't hear Kane Williamson's press conference afterwards because it was early in the morning for our time, so I didn't get up for that one. But I watch the cricket in the morning. I won't stick around for press conferences. You'll be shocked to know. But I'd be really interested to know what his thoughts were, because if I was the captain of that, I'd be like, we had a really good chance of beating a very good team in these conditions, and we've given that up. And Ravichandran Ravindra's 100. Did he make 100 in the end or whatever?
No, just short.
Yeah, his innings in that second innings was brilliant. I loved watching it. That ball was ragging at that stage. I know one of the Sri Lankan spinners got the yips, and so that always helps. So they had that, Dhananjaya De Silva had to play, but they had chances to win that game, and I think they would be pretty disappointed. Would they need about 240, 260?
260.
They just lost too many wickets early, and then they had lost another batch in the middle. One guy staying with Ravichandran Ravindra, and they win that game. So that's probably good news. The difference now is that it goes back to what we were saying before. I think, these Sri Lankan spinners, Dhananjaya De Silva is more of a part-timer, but bowled very well in that series. But obviously the left-arm finger spinner is a brilliant bowler, especially in Sri Lankan conditions. But he's about 15 kilometers slower than Jadeja. Like, it's a completely different kind of bowler, right? So it's not like the old days where you're like, oh yeah, we'll go to Sri Lanka first or Bangladesh first to warm up for India. Like, there is no warming up for India. So I still think New Zealand is going to struggle. But if I was them, I'd be happy that I was in the game, but disappointed that ultimately they had 2. I think they had 2 chances to win that game, and they let them go.
Yeah, I really like William Rook. Saw his first couple of matches. He played against Australia, and I think he's definitely got something. And also, Ajaz Patel, he hadn't bowled since March, and you could just tell, just that second innings, you could just tell with just a little bit of bowling in him, he was suddenly, oh, I can do this. I remember how to do this.
Yep.
So maybe he'll progress as the series against Sri Lanka and then India.
It is funny with him, isn't it? In general, like, did he not play any county cricket this year?
No.
Because didn't he play county cricket the year before? Didn't he sign with someone?
Didn't he come in for like 1 game or something?
Oh, was that what it was?
Towards the back end of the season.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
I just remember seeing him in a county game at one stage and being like, what the hell is happening here? But he's going to end up with one of the weirder careers, right? Because obviously the 10-wicket innings haul, which was absolutely bizarre, but also it's like he doesn't exist.
No,
at all. And then suddenly it's like, come and win us a test match in Asia.
He took 10 wickets and was dropped for the next 10 wickets in a match, in an innings, and was dropped for the next match. That sums him up.
So so I think you're right. He just sort of disappears, and then you're just like, now what we need you to do is we need you to bowl like all the overs from one end while we rotate you with Rachin Ravindra and Glenn Phillips, like, you know, and Mitch Santner. And it's like, well, I mean, what are you doing to this poor guy?
And also they've got a little bit of a situation because Tim Southey's the captain now, right? And, you know, they're going to be playing some matches with just one seamer, you'd imagine. So Rook has got to play ahead of him. Yep. Anyway, Jarrod, thank you for your time. We'll be back next week. Thanks for watching Following on India with myself, Jon Norman, Jarrod Kimber. Thanks to our guests as well. We will be back next week looking back at the second test between India and Bangladesh. Join us then.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.